You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb and intern Michael.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you gentlemen doing?
Doing well.
I asked if we were ready, and the response I got did not seem overly enthusiastic.
Ho-hum is a response.
It is a response.
Sometimes no news is good news.
That's what they say. No news is good news. So this is a subject that I find compelling. I'm not sure the rest of the room finds it compelling. Is that fair to say?
That's interesting. I don't know how compelling it needs to be to talk about it. What are you talking about? What are we talking about?
I told you this morning when you got here that I did something that I never do, which is I actually listened to an episode of Psych with Mike. And I listened to the episode that I posted today, which is Friday, the 8th of July for anybody keeping track at home. And in that show, we had Michelle Stieg here, who you had brought with you a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about theoretical orientation. And I was saying that, you know, my theoretical orientation comes from the psychodynamic perspective and Heinz Kohut and the development of parenting models, which leads to attachment. And I had talked about Piaget's original stage of development, which is trust versus mistrust. And it's just so, that is so much the foundation of how I understand human psychology, that when I think about doing therapy and I think about people who have had challenges in their sense of security and in their attachment styles, the question becomes, as an adult, what can you do about that? Let's assume that this underlying theory of psychology that I subscribe to is cogent, that it makes sense, that it's accurate, and you have struggles with those early years and those early relationships, as a lot of us have. Brett, you and I know that we talk about that all the time. We don't know as much about Michael's relationship with his primary caregivers as an infant, but we know that you and I really struggled with that. And so as adults, we've had to learn compensatory behaviors or compensatory abilities to be able to be in attached relationships and to feel more secure. And so how do you give that to somebody in therapy? That's really kind of my focus.
So you are questioning whether or not a typical, if there is such a thing, client coming in for the first time that you don't know, whatever they're presenting issue or reason for being there is in all likelihood suffering from some kind of attachment disorder, suffered from childhood distress or trauma. Is that what your postulation?
Yeah.
I think I would agree with that. That's an accurate encapsulation of what's going on in therapy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of therapy, if it's successful, involves reparenting that wounded inner child. Whether that's the individual learns how to reparent themselves, or whether you model and demonstrate for them how to reparent themselves. I think if the therapy is beneficial and successful, it will involve reparenting some of those scripts that are wounded and broken scripts that we carry around inside ourselves.
Yeah. I remember when I was in graduate school, I don't know if you knew this at the time, but people talk about inner child. And back in the mid '90s when I was actually in grad school,
it was a buzzword.
It was like,
for a number of
absolutely
years,
everybody was talking about inner child, and I used to say all the time, the only thing that I want from my inner child is his Skittles, and then I'm going to kick his ass. And because I didn't want to hear that kind of language, it felt offensive to me. And what I realized later was not because that's not true or accurate, but because I wasn't ready.
You were resisting.
Yeah. I was resisting it big time. And so I think that go ahead.
We look at things like internal family systems, right? Where when we ignore or suppress those inner children or whatever parts of us that they are, they really show up in other places in our life and in ways that we didn't necessarily
absolutely.
hope for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the central premise of IFS.
Yeah.
And
listen
so
to your parts and be aware of their existence.
And I don't know if you've seen the episodes that we've done with Michelle, but she is an IFS therapist. And so that was exactly the conversation that we were having. And, Brett and I have always been, I think Brett's more open to it now. I'm still less open to it. The idea of IFS, which I don't.
For me, it's a descriptor. You have to find a language that you and your client can share.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges of being a therapist is to listen to the language that the client uses so that you can do appropriate feedback and reflective listening in a way that demonstrates that you hear them accurately. So if I have a client who's a truck driver and I can do it appropriately, I try to use driving analogies as often as I can. It's like what you experience. If I have a client that's a computer programmer, I'll use computer examples. Whatever I can do, if I can do it. And if I can't do it, then I say, you have to educate me. I don't know. Teach me your language. But I listen. And some of it is neuro-linguistic programming. You hear the things they say, and you can determine the way they experience the world. If they do it visually, if they do it orally, if they do it tactily. And that helps you then speak in the rhythm that they can hear. So I think that's a critical component.
I think IFS also offers that language too, because even children talk about this idea that, there's a part of me that got angry, and so it's really easy to latch on to that. A part. Let's talk about this part.
And not take ownership of the whole thing. No, that was just a part of me.
And it reminds me of, you talk about it's just another frame or another language or another structure on top of some very good, very old ideas. It reminds me of, Gestalt's empty chair technique, where we sit somebody down and we say, what would you say to yourself? But now instead of talking to your whole self, maybe you're just talking to one part of yourself.
Absolutely. And if you've ever had an opportunity to experience that, literally making them move from one chair to the other is an essential component of that technique. They sit in one chair and they say what their mother said. Then they sit in their chair and say what they would say if their mother could hear them. If you say anything you want to your mother, and even if she's dead, and she could hear you and understand you, what would you say? You give yourself permission. Say it out loud. Then get back in the chair. And so you facilitate that conversation, but they do all the work.
Yeah.
And they have all the conversation, and they generate all the concepts.
But let's not gloss over the technique. It's super, super important that they change chairs.
Oh, absolutely.
Because psychologically, they
shift
the viewpoint, and you don't have to understand why that happens as a therapist, but you got to understand to try and ask them to remain in the same chair and have that dualistic kind of message going on in their brain is extremely difficult.
Which is why you can't do therapy with yourself. You need another voice. You need another person.
You can't do therapy with yourself?
And therein lies the rub.
Well, even the article talks about this idea of when you're making interpersonal changes, making peace with the past. They quote one participant in saying that she was able to observe something that happened in her past and become aware of it. So we're talking about how do we inch towards security, and how do we progress towards that idea of the secure attachments? And awareness, I think, is what we're really touching on. Being critically aware of all of these things that got you to the place that you are, and then being able to critically ask yourself, what do I like? What don't I like? What do I just have to live with?
And because they said it doesn't make it so.
Correct.
I was told you're too stupid to go to college.
So, okay.
Also, the article one more.
Yeah.
The article talks about in the process of doing that, this individual was able to reframe her understanding and compassion for her mother, who had been pretty traumatizing, for reasons that she now had a better grasp on, which helped her reframe the dance between she and her mother.
And you know that I'm like in a real Jung phase right now. I'm reading all of Jung's stuff and everything, and so that's kind of where my focus is. And one of the things that I am really starting to realize, and I'm going to go off track here because I'm building a clock. You talk about all the time. Whose perspective is it that you can't? Kernberg's idea that you can't really address your whatever they are, bipolar or narcissistic or whatever, personality issues until in your 50s or later.
Late 40s, early 50s.
And I am so in that vein right now because I've been doing all of this study with Jung. And one of the things that I'm recognizing is this idea of trying to embrace the shadow. And so you know this, and Michael, you probably may or may not know this, but I'm blind in my left eye. And it doesn't always track with my right eye. When I tell people this the first time, most people say, "Oh, I never knew that. I never." And it's amazing to me how little other people, but people don't really pay attention to their environment. And so it's amazing to me how much people will say, "Oh, I never knew that," because it's been such my retina detached when I was in high school playing football. It was the end of my football career. And if I tell people this, it makes me seem very sympathetic to most people, right? To me, it's something that is embarrassing and shameful, and I've always tried to hide it. So it's been a part of my shadow. And so I've really been trying to work on embracing that. But that, to me, that's what what Jung talks about in the shadow and the persona and the self is really an aspect of IFS.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And I only just now made that comparison because we've been talking to Michelle, and
There's nothing new under the sun.
there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. It's amazing. But so when we're talking about the inner child, what seems to me to be the clinical focus would be, how do I help you, Brett, or you, Michael, identify what are those pieces of your wounded child that you live with or try and hide, and how can I help you to embrace that, not so that you can resolve the trauma, but so that you can live with it without fear, insecurity, or shame.
So I think one of the ways that a therapist does that is to begin with what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. I want to say to you that I hear what you were saying, and I honor you for surviving whatever your experience was. Nothing shameful or disgusting or horrible or evil or wicked in what you did to survive. However you managed it, you got here. How you got here today is not on you. That's on others, and the adults in your life in particular. How you leave here is on you. And what I can offer you is the promise that if we do this work properly, you will leave here with more power and more control than you've ever had at hearing the voice from among those voices inside you that you want to hear, that you need to hear. So if you will talk to me and you will trust the process, what you'll see is that I absolutely accept and honor who you are and how you got here. Especially those that have had severe and chronic abuse experiences in their life, who were shamed and threatened and punished because of that. To say to them, you don't have to be in touch with that part of that any longer than you want to. You don't need it anymore to survive. You survived to this point. Let's talk about what you need to go out of here and be able, not necessarily to get rid of that, but to put it back in the bag and keep it so that you can take it out if you want to.
So let's go to our break, and then when we come back, I really like the language that you're using here, and so I want to ask you a question about that,
Sure.
but let's go to our break, and I'll do that on the other side.
All right.
Hey everybody, Dr. Michael Mahan here from Psych with Mike, and I couldn't be more excited to talk to you about Athletic Greens, which is a new sponsor we have here on the show. I started taking Athletic Greens, watching some YouTube videos, and doing my own research. I wanted to add something to my daily workout program to give me some energy and to support gut health. And that was the one thing that kept coming up again and again with Athletic Greens, is the guy who started the company did a bunch of research because he was having some gut health issues that he couldn't get any resolution for. He developed Athletic Greens, and it's just exploded from there. So it's 75 superfoods, vitamins, minerals, probiotics, whole food sources that's all in one daily scoop. You put it in 8 or 12 ounces of water, you shake it up, and you drink it. The taste is very, very drinkable. I actually enjoy it, and I have been using it, and my energy levels have just been through the roof. I really like Athletic Greens because of some of the sustainability things that they do. So they buy carbon credits and, to help protect the rainforest, which is something that I really like. But if you order Athletic Greens in your subscription, you're going to also get a year's supply of their vitamin D supplementation and 5 free travel packs. And that vitamin D is so important during those winter months when we're not getting enough sunlight. We've talked about how that decreases your mood and increases depression, and that can be a real deal changer. So you go to athleticgreens.com/emerging. That's athleticgreens.com/EMERGING. That's the Psych with Mike promo, and you're going to get that additional vitamin D support for a year and 5 free travel packs. So take control of your own health today. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
Okay, we're back. And so I really like that language that you're using, and what I'm wanting to know, to try and crystallize this for me is, how do you initially approach that shame that the client feels? How do you do that in a way that doesn't get them to turtle up and want to defend themselves?
So one of the things that occurs.
And do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurs is I get angry that some adult has abused a child. I am angry. A child that survived that kind of abuse is hypersensitive to my anger. So I want to identify it and say, I am angry, but I'm not angry with you. I'm not angry at whatever you had to do to survive. I have no antagonism towards that at all.
Wow. Okay. This is exactly where I wanted to go. Yeah. Because I didn't know that it was, but yeah, this is exactly right. So your countertransference is to be angry.
Setting off their radar, though.
But their transference then is to experience that anger as similarly traumatizing to their original experience.
It can be. It interferes with the connection and the strengthening of that individual. So what they have to experience from me, and I don't know if you pay close enough attention, but when I drop into therapy mode that way, my voice changes, my delivery changes. It's more soothing.
Yeah, I've never noticed that.
Than when I'm just casually in conversation. Yeah. That's because you've never been in therapy with me. Asshole.
I've noticed that a million different. I could identify a million different times when I knew Brett just dropped into therapy.
He's doing it. He's doing it. Yeah.
And I'm sure if I called your wife, she would be able to corroborate
points it out.
I think Robin Williams and Matt Damon spend an entire movie getting to this point that we're getting to here, where it's not your fault is a very powerful message.
Goodwill Hunting, absolutely. It's an incredibly powerful message and necessary.
But okay, so let me go back to this, and so the countertransference is you would be angry, And just countertransference is the
coming from me,
therapist
projected onto you.
and then the transference is the client's experience of the therapist in therapy. And so
Well, the client is constantly going to try to manipulate me into the traditional response that they have received.
Which is
you have to. They'll come in and say, today they say, "Are you going to give me homework?" I say, "Well, do you need homework? Do you want homework?" "Yeah, I think so." "Well, all right, here's some homework." And then next week they come in, "Oh, you're going to be really mad at me."
"Yeah, I didn't do my homework."
"Well, why am I going to be mad at you?" "I didn't do my homework." "Okay."
So,
what? You're not
so
mad?
what? No, I didn't want. I wasn't going to give you homework to begin with.
Did you want a grade?
Yeah, exactly.
But I really want to go back on
failure,
this point.
you loser.
So the transference is, the countertransference is that you get angry because the child's been abused. The transference is this is re-traumatizing the same way. So you're saying, okay, so I say to them, I'm not angry at you. I'm angry that the situation occurred. Do you ever try and not be angry?
I don't try to not be angry. If I'm angry, I'm angry. What I try to do is clarify.
Right.
You are picking up accurately what you're getting. But let me clarify. It's not you that I'm angry with.
But this is the point that I think is so important for therapists generally and for new therapists. The goal isn't for you to not have emotions.
Right. You're not the blank mirror that beginners are told they need to be.
Exactly.
You are a real person with real feelings, and the client picks up on all that. So you have to be able to say, "I'm sad," and cry when you hear something sad, or laugh when something's funny to you, and then say, "I didn't mean to offend you. It just struck me as funny. How do we work past that?"
Right. But you have to be aware enough of your own internal processes.
I had a couple come see me one time, a black man and a white woman, came for marital counseling. First session. I'm talking to them about coming for marriage counseling. And I said, I really...
Was that Clarence Thomas?
...want to communicate to you that I think I can hear you. And I want to hear if you have any concerns about my ability to hear you. And the black man looked at his wife. He looked at me and he said, "One of the troubles that we are having has to do with sex. And I fantasize all the time about having sex with white women. Are you too white to hear that?" Which I thought was a brilliant question, and one he needed to have answered if I was going to be able to help him, if I was going to be able to sit in a room with him. If I'm sitting there judging him and condemning him for his fantasies, I can't help him.
Right.
And I know that, and he knows that. So he was able to ask, "Can you listen?
But I
Can
think
you hear?"
And I'm glad that the client was able to do that. But I think the point that you made about therapists in their training are conditioned to believe they're supposed to be blank slates, which is an unachievable goal.
Absolutely. It's impossible.
You have to be a human person.
Inhumane.
But you have to be a human person capable of monitoring their own processes well enough to know when it's not your... I'm sitting here, I'm angry because you're telling me the story of abuse, but I'm not angry at you.
Yeah,
I'm angry because this happened to a child.
So that's the point of the conversation about modeling and reparenting, because they experience in their most vulnerable and anxious moments modeling of appropriate responsiveness, not what they experienced in their childhood.
Yeah.
And so then you can process that and discuss, what did that feel like? What just happened? Are you aware of that? What are your reactions to it? What's your level of awareness to it? Because in doing that, we're reparenting their script.
And one of the things that I will point out now, because this is sailing or coming into my consciousness, is I have had many clients, especially when I was younger, because now I'm pretty old, but when I was younger, I had many clients who were much older than me that were able to experience me as a caring, nurturing parent. So you don't have to necessarily think, oh, I'm 32, how am I going to do this for a 50-year-old man? You can do it because it's not yours to do. It's the client's experience that matters, and the client can have that experience.
I don't know if I fully agree with that.
You don't?
I think I do, but I'm mindful of the fact that for years what I would tell my students in counseling program, younger students especially, is I don't care what skills you learn, you need some aging. Because if I walk into your office with marital issues and I look at you and you're 27 and I'm 70, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to take that risk because I can't imagine that you can understand my circumstances. So I don't know how that changes, but there is a presentation that they have to learn how to make that says to me, okay, there's something here that maybe I can take this risk.
Right.
Or there's something here that maybe I'm willing to float this out here.
Right.
But initially, my impressions are you're too young to know what you're talking about. Have you ever had any children? Have you been a parent?
And I think that this goes back to the idea of there are different therapists for different people.
Absolutely.
And so if the 70-year-old man comes in and can't put themselves in that position, then that's not a good therapy experience for them, and they should find somebody else. But what I have experienced is that you can present yourself as timeless once you learn how to do that.
If you get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the client has to buy into it.
Right.
And if the client doesn't, then no, then it's not going to work. But I have had men who were twice my age who I know experienced me as a nurturing parent. And so that can happen as long as the therapist is good at their job and doing things right, and the client is able to open themselves up to it.
I think another part of your point there is also you were speaking about getting angry with not angry at the client, but angry with the client. For the client.
For the client.
But
absolutely.
That's the language that I think I want to pick on maybe a little bit, because your job as a therapist is not to feel the emotion for the client.
Oh, absolutely. I have to clearly say, this is mine. It's coming out of me and my friend at the whole countertransference message, but it's not at you. It's at however you were wounded. The fact that any child is wounded that way. And that comes from me. I take ownership of it. And you don't need to feel it. And we need to have this. It's just not one trial learning. We will repeat this conversation a number of times before you can internalize it.
And the clarification though that I would make is that we are not, so countertransference, I guess if it's countertransference, it could be the therapist's own stuff. But when you're doing therapy, you are going to experience emotions as a therapist that are being projected by the client. So you're not feeling it for them, you're feeling it with them, and they may not have the language to be able to identify it. Like the client may be experiencing shame over that trauma event, and you may be experiencing anger, and so it's important for the therapist to help them be able to identify that language. And then once you do that, then the client says, you know what, I'm pretty angry about that, and I didn't know that. And so it's important for the therapist to be able to help the client develop language around their own emotional regulation that they don't already
Michael's
have.
right. You have to make the distinction.
Yeah.
These are not your feelings or my reflection of your feelings. These are mine. And they're not really about you at all. They're about the circumstances you're describing. And it's hard.
And I think there's a consent there too, right? Your client has to be willing to feel that with you, and maybe they don't feel that at all, right? Maybe they aren't angry.
Nudge it repeatedly,
right?
If they keep coming back, eventually they will.
And that's the other piece that shocks me about. Well, it doesn't necessarily shock me about security, but that I find interesting about becoming more secure. Somebody very close to me is going through a therapy process right now, and they have had an emotionally abusive mother for almost all of their lives. And they're also gay. And they came out with this. They came back to me one day and I said, well, how did therapy go? And they said, I didn't realize that not everybody's parents called them a faggot. And I said, that's correct. That is an emotionally abusive situation. And that hurts. And he said, I got a lot out of this therapy session because suddenly I realized that wasn't normal, and that I didn't like that. I said, okay, very good, right? And so I really felt that there's a marked difference in this person and how they see themselves and how they accept themselves and their sexual identity after that conversation.
Right.
Good.
And I
Just
so
wow.
I think that
When it works, it's beautiful. It's powerful. You can see it. Yeah.
we started this out talking about the idea of the inner child and the relationship of that to Jung's theory of the shadow, and so I think that there is a part of therapy that is directed towards helping people embrace the shadow. I think that's how you truly are able to establish security as an adult, is to be able to embrace those parts of yourself that you have felt either shame or, tried to hide. I think that is the healthy way to be able to do that. But, when you're talking about this, is he going to embrace the idea that his mother called him a faggot for all of his life? Maybe not. And so it's about acceptance. I got to find a way to accept that. So do you think that he found that, or is he still looking for that?
I think he has accepted that is his reality.
Yeah.
And that was
And
what
that's very
happened.
liberating.
And I think he always accepted that was what happened, right? He didn't deny that as a reality. It was more the understanding that wasn't the norm.
Yeah.
That when that happens to other people, they also get angry, and it is okay to feel that anger.
Right.
And he is justified in that anger, and it does mean something.
So maybe that's what he's working to accept, is the anger that because he was always in denial about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and he wasn't allowed to feel that feeling, because on top of the hate that he gets from the idea of the sexual identity, there are other ideas of masculinity underneath that, and a less than man who is gay, right? If I show emotion, if I express this idea, well, that makes me more feminine, and that leans into this idea of being this thing that my parent dislikes or my parent is picking on.
So many shame-based messages.
Yes, it's a shame minefield.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point to jump off the train. Hopefully this was beneficial for people. As always, if you have any questions or comments about things that we're talking about, please reach out to us at psychwithmike.com. We would love it if you would go to Apple Podcasts, find Psych with Mike, and leave us a comment and a rating. But most importantly, we really, 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 really love it when people go to the internets and find us on YouTube, Psych with Mike, and subscribe to the show. That's super, super beneficial, helps people find the show. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.